The wristwatch ticks under his cuff while the luxury conference room holds its breath. Monday morning. Polished glass. Bottled water lined up like evidence. 12 board members sit around the table, and every face is trained on the CEO they are about to remove. The danger is not the vote. The danger is what the vote awakens in him, the old hunger to prove he is still untouchable. Most men do not lose themselves because someone attacks them. They lose themselves because their ego mistakes humiliation for death. His hand rests near the watch, feeling each small strike of time against his skin. Tick, tick, tick. Everything he built is being measured in silence. What remains of a man when the room no longer fears his title? Samurai discipline will not save him from the takeover. It will teach him how to stand inside it without surrendering command. The CEO hears the motion before anyone says it out loud. Not in the legal language. Not in the careful phrases about transition, confidence, and the long-term health of the company. He hears it in the way the board chair avoids his eyes. In the way one member closes a leather folder too slowly. In the way another man, a man who used to laugh too loudly at his jokes, keeps both hands folded on the table as if friendship has suddenly become a conflict of interest. The room is expensive enough to hide discomfort. Thick carpet. Soft recessed lighting. A long table that has seen acquisitions, celebrations, private threats, and handshakes that meant less than they cost. Outside the glass wall, the city is already moving into Monday morning. Elevators rising. Coffee cooling. Phones lighting up. Somewhere below, employees are opening laptops under a company logo with his name still attached to its history. But in here, the air is sealed. And on his wrist, the watch keeps ticking. He bought that watch after the first major deal closed. Back then, he told himself it was a symbol of discipline. Proof that he had earned control over his time. Proof that the poor kid who once checked the bus schedule in the rain had built something nobody could take away. Now the same watch sounds almost insulting. Tick. A vote is being prepared. Tick. A legacy is being separated from its owner. Tick. A man who built a kingdom is being asked to sit still while others decide whether he still belongs on the throne. The first confrontation is not with the board. It is with the part of him that wants to punish the room for making him feel small. That is the hidden violence of ego. It does not always shout. Sometimes it speaks in a calm, polished voice. Sometimes it uses legal words, financial language, moral superiority. Sometimes it smiles while reaching for a knife made of memory. I made you. I carried this company. You were nobody before I gave you a seat at this table. He can feel those sentences lining up behind his teeth. His jaw tightens. His thumb moves once across the edge of the watch case. He looks at the chairwoman, then at the oldest board member, then at the empty space in front of him where the printed agenda sits. Item 4, Executive Leadership Resolution. Such a clean phrase for humiliation. And that is where people misunderstand pressure. They think the most dangerous moments are loud. A screaming match. A public failure. A breaking point everyone can see. But some of the worst losses of command happen in rooms like this, where nobody raises their voice, where the ice in the water glasses barely moves, where a man can destroy the last piece of his dignity with one beautifully phrased sentence. He has arguments. Good ones. Sharp ones. Some of them are even true. He knows which member leaked concerns to the press. He knows who wanted his office years before this morning. He knows the private calls, the quiet alliances, the language of betrayal dressed as governance. He could expose hypocrisy. He could make the room bleed reputation without ever sounding angry. And his ego wants that. Not justice. Not clarity. Retaliation wearing a tailored suit. Under the table, his left hand closes once, then opens. Nobody sees it. That is usually where character starts to fail, in the unseen movement before the visible action. The crushing fear underneath his anger is simpler than he wants to admit. He is afraid that without the title, he is not a man people return calls to. He is afraid the company was not just his work, but his proof of existence. He is afraid of walking out of this conference room and becoming a headline, then a memory, then a name people mention carefully at dinners when they want to sound informed. He is afraid of losing everything because he has quietly treated everything as one thing: the chair, the office, the stock price, the admiration, the private elevator, the way younger executives lowered their voices when he entered. And when a man ties his identity to one tower, every threat feels like demolition. There is a phone in his pocket with messages he has not answered. One from his adult daughter, sent late Sunday night: "Hope tomorrow goes okay. Call me when you can." He saw it. He did not reply. He was too busy rehearsing a defense he told himself was strategy. The truth is rougher. He did not want to speak to anyone who remembered him before the title. He did not want tenderness near the battlefield. It made him feel less armored. That small unanswered message sits inside him now, more painful than he expected. Because the board can remove a CEO. They cannot remove a father, unless he has already abandoned that role to protect the image of power. Across the table, the chairwoman begins. Her voice is even. She thanks him for his years of service. She speaks of market pressure, internal confidence, fiduciary responsibility, and the need for new leadership. Each sentence is wrapped in respect, but the meaning is clean: step aside, or be moved aside. His eyes drop to the watch. The ticking has become the only honest thing in the room. No flattery. No betrayal. No spin. Just time, cutting evenly through everyone's performance. In Fudoshin, the lesson is not to become numb. Numb men make terrible decisions and call it strength. The point is not to pretend the insult does not hurt. It hurts. The vote is real. The fear is real. The ego is loud because something in him has been hit hard. But emotion is not the problem. Uncommanded emotion is the problem. A disciplined man does not ask, "How do I stop feeling this?" He asks, "What part of me is trying to take the wheel?" Right now, the part trying to take the wheel is not wisdom. It is the injured king inside him. The part that believes respect must be forced back into the room. The part that would rather be feared for one more minute than remembered with dignity for one more decade. He looks at the board member to his right, a younger director who cannot quite hold his gaze. The old CEO in him wants to lean forward and say the one thing that would ruin him. Something personal. Something precise. Something that would remind the room he still has teeth. His breath shortens. The watch ticks. And for half a second, the whole future bends around his mouth. That is the confrontation. Not the takeover. Not the vote. The half second before response becomes identity. Most people think character is revealed in the outcome. Whether he keeps the company. Whether he wins the vote. Whether the board backs down. But character is often revealed before the outcome arrives, in the private instant when nobody can stop you from being petty except yourself. The luxury conference room does not care who he believes he is. The glass table reflects his face with a faint distortion. His suit is perfect. His posture is almost perfect. But inside, something is scrambling. It wants a witness. It wants someone to confirm that he still matters. That hunger is dangerous because it can imitate principle. He could tell himself he is defending the company. He could tell himself he is protecting employees. He could tell himself he is standing against cowardice. Some of that might be true. But if the sentence leaves his mouth carrying contempt, then contempt is the commander. If the next move is designed to wound, then fear has already signed the order. The mind under threat becomes a courtroom where the ego serves as judge, lawyer, and victim. It presents evidence fast. Remember who betrayed you. Remember what you sacrificed. Remember the nights you slept in the office. Remember the first investor who laughed at you. Remember the people who said you were too aggressive, then cashed checks because you were aggressive. The memories are not false. That is what makes them powerful. A lie is easier to reject. A true memory with a poisoned conclusion can own a man before he notices. The conclusion forming inside him is simple: they are taking everything. But the watch keeps correcting him. Tick. They are taking the role. Tick. They are taking the chair. Tick. They are taking the version of you that needed the room to bow. That distinction feels small at first. Almost useless. But in pressure, small distinctions become handholds. Because if they are taking everything, then any reaction is permitted. Rage becomes self-defense. Cruelty becomes honesty. Panic becomes urgency. But if they are taking one role, one title, one chapter, then he still has work to do inside himself. He still has a voice to govern. He still has a face to carry. He still has a choice about what kind of man walks out. The chairwoman pauses. Before we proceed to the vote, she says, "We want to offer you the opportunity to speak." There it is. The opening ego has been waiting for. Every head turns. The room gives him silence, and silence can feel like a weapon when a man is afraid. He places his palm flat on the table. The surface is cool. His fingers want to drum, so he keeps them still. His eyes move once to the agenda, once to the watch, once to the faces around him. A lesser response is available. He can perform calm while delivering punishment. He can make one director look disloyal. He can make another look weak. He can remind them of numbers, favors, failures, private doubts. He can use truth without honor. People do it every day and call it being direct. But samurai discipline, in this modern room, is not softness. It is the refusal to let injury write the script. It is choosing the next sentence from command instead of from the wound. That does not mean he agrees. It does not mean he smiles while being dismantled. It does not mean he offers himself up like a polite victim so everyone else can feel clean. Boundaries still matter. Clarity still matters. Truth still matters. But there is a difference between truth used as a blade and truth used as a line. The board is watching for weakness. Some are watching for anger. A few are watching for proof that their decision was right. That is another trap. When people expect you to lose command, part of you wants to show them a more impressive version of control. Colder. Sharper. Untouchable. That is still ego. Calm command is quieter than that. It does not need to look cinematic to the room. It only needs to be honest inside the body. So he lets the silence stay for one more breath. Not as theater. As recovery. His thumb touches the watch again, but this time he does not use it to measure what is being taken. He uses it to remember that time has not stopped. This moment is not his whole life. It is a severe moment, a public moment, a costly moment, but still only a moment. The fear of losing everything begins to separate from the facts. He may lose the vote. He may lose the office. He may lose the version of respect that came with power. But he does not have to lose his command. That is the first real victory available in the room, and it is invisible to anyone who only understands winning as control over other people. The CEO lifts his eyes. The hostile takeover is still happening. The board is still seated. The agenda is still on the table. The watch is still ticking beneath his cuff. But something in him has stopped reaching for revenge long enough to reach for discipline. Training begins before he feels calm. It begins while the watch is still ticking against his wrist, while 12 people are waiting for him to prove who is really in command. It begins before the perfect sentence appears. Before the anger leaves. Before the fear becomes respectable enough to admit. His first act is small enough that nobody in the room would call it discipline. He does not speak. The chairwoman has offered him the floor, and his ego reaches for it like a weapon. He can feel the old rhythm, lean forward, lower the voice, make the room uncomfortable, remind them who built the walls they are now hiding behind. It would feel powerful for 3 seconds. Maybe 5. So he keeps his mouth closed. His tongue rests behind his teeth. His jaw unlocks by a fraction. His shoulders drop just enough to let air enter his chest instead of staying trapped high in his throat. He does not announce his restraint. He does not turn it into a performance. He simply refuses to let the first impulse become the first sentence. That pause is not weakness in a luxury conference room. It is the first clean inch of ground. The second act is physical. He places both feet flat beneath the table. There is no drama in it. No one sees the movement except maybe the director beside him, and even she would not know what it means. But his body knows. A man about to lose everything often floats upward into his head. He starts living behind his forehead, inside arguments, headlines, imaginary conversations, future humiliations. The body becomes a suit sitting in a chair while the mind runs into a burning building. So he comes back down. Heel. Sole. Floor. The carpet is thick, but he presses through it anyway. The pressure under his shoes tells him where he is, not in next week's news cycle, not in the first investor meeting 10 years ago, not in some imagined dinner where people speak of him in past tense. Here. Monday morning. Conference room. Vote pending. Watch ticking. He lets those facts line up without adding a story to them. The third act is to name the real opponent without saying it out loud. Not the chairwoman. Not the board. Not the man across from him who has wanted this seat for years. The opponent is the crushing ego and the fear of losing everything, fused so tightly they feel like one force. He gives it a private name, fear-wearing authority. That is enough. Once named, it loses some of its costume. It can still speak. It can still tighten his hand around the edge of the table. It can still bring up the unpaid cost of every sacrifice, every missed birthday dinner, every morning he walked into this building before sunrise because he believed the company needed him more than anyone else did. But now he can see it working. Fear says, make them regret this. Ego says, do not leave quietly. Discipline asks a colder question, what sentence can you live with tomorrow? His thumb finds the watch under his cuff again. Earlier, the ticking felt like a verdict. Now he uses it as a metronome. 1 tick to inhale. 1 tick to let the breath settle. He does not take some exaggerated breath that would make the room think he is trying to look composed. He breathes the way a man breathes when he is trying to keep his hands from betraying him. Small. Low. Private. The fourth act is to shrink the battlefield. The ego wants the whole war handled at once: legacy, betrayal, reputation, money, the office, the company, the biography of his life. It drags every decade into the room and demands one victorious speech that can defeat all of it. That is how men lose command. They try to answer their entire life in one meeting. He looks only at the next clean action. Not winning the vote. Not saving the title. Not forcing respect. Just answering the room without poisoning himself. His palm remains flat on the table. He feels the cool glass under the heel of his hand. He notices a ring of condensation near a water bottle. He notices the chairwoman's pen resting at a slight angle beside her notes. He notices the agenda, item 4, still sitting there with its sterile little phrase. These details do not solve anything. They return him to size. A takeover is enormous when the mind feeds it everything. In the body, it becomes one room, one table, one question, one response. He lifts his eyes slowly, not to intimidate anyone, and not to plead. Just to see. That is the fifth act. He separates truth from revenge. He has the right to speak clearly. He has the right to disagree with the process. He has the right to defend his record. Discipline does not ask a man to become furniture while others move him around. But if he speaks from the wound, even accurate words will carry the smell of panic. So he tests the sentence before releasing it. Does it clarify, or does it punish? Does it protect a boundary, or does it scratch an old humiliation? Does it serve the company he claims to care about, or only the image of the man who cannot bear being replaced? A few seconds pass. In that silence, one board member shifts in his chair. Another glances down at his notes. The room wants him to fill the space. Nervous rooms hate patience. They would rather have anger, because anger gives everyone a role. The aggressor. The victim. The reasonable observer. The one who warned this would happen. Patience gives them nothing to hide behind. The CEO turns the watch slightly on his wrist until the face sits centered. It is almost absurd, the neatness of that gesture in a moment this ugly. But ritual does not need to be grand. Sometimes it is just putting one object back into alignment so the mind remembers how alignment feels. Then he speaks. Before the vote, he says, "I want the record to show that I disagree with the judgment being made here." His voice is not warm. It does not need to be. Calm is not the same thing as pleasant. I believe the timing is damaging. I believe the process has been shaped by private conversations that should have been brought into this room earlier. And I believe the company deserves a transition that does not turn internal fear into public instability. A couple of faces change. There it is, truth with a line around it. No insult. No theatrical forgiveness. No begging. No personal strike dressed up as courage. He continues. I will not pretend this is easy. I will not pretend I agree. But I will not turn this room into a spectacle to protect my pride. That sentence costs him more than the others. He feels it as soon as it leaves his mouth. Pride does not like being named in public, especially by the man it has protected for years. Something in him flinches. The old self wants to correct the sentence, sharpen it, add a warning. Make sure they understand he is still dangerous. The watch ticks once. He lets the urge pass without feeding it. That is practice. Not a peaceful feeling. Not a clean victory. Practice. He turns toward the younger director who could not meet his eyes earlier. If the vote goes forward, he says, then my expectation is that the board protects the people doing the work, not just the story told to the market. The younger director finally looks up. Good. Let the line land there. The sixth act is accepting the humiliation without helping it define him. He does not rush to sound noble. He does not wrap the moment in some polished speech about gratitude and next chapters. Too much grace, delivered too quickly, can become another form of ego. A man trying to look above pain is still being managed by pain. So he allows the difficulty to be visible without becoming messy. His mouth is dry. He takes a measured drink of water. He sets the glass down softly. The sound is small, but in the silence it matters. It proves his hand can still obey him. Then he adds, I will cooperate with a lawful transition if that is the decision. I will also reserve the right to respond appropriately to the process after this meeting. A boundary. No threat. The room understands the difference. This is how Shugyo appears in a place with polished marble and catered coffee. It is not sweat on a mountain trail. It is not some dramatic test made for a poster. It is the hard training of staying human when status is being stripped away in front of witnesses. Stop before the first wound speaks. Bring the feet back to the floor. Use the watch as an anchor, not a verdict. Shrink the battle to the next clean sentence. Speak truth without giving revenge the microphone. Repeat until the room no longer owns the nervous system. That is the ritual he is building under pressure. The board may still remove him. The headlines may still come. His office may still be packed into boxes by Friday afternoon. But in this minute, with the vote still hanging over the table, the CEO has recovered one thing no board can grant and no board can take. He has recovered the authority to choose the man who answers. The room does not soften because he has found control. That is the first honest thing about transformation. The board members do not suddenly lower their eyes in shame. The chairwoman does not take back the motion. The younger director does not rise from his seat and confess that the process has been unfair. No one in the luxury conference room becomes a better person just because the CEO has decided not to become a worse one. The vote still moves forward. Names are called. Responses are given. The corporate secretary marks each answer with a pen that sounds too loud against paper. For. Abstain. For. Against. For. Each word lands with the weight of something being removed. The CEO keeps his hands where he can see them. That matters more than it looks like. A few minutes ago, those same hands wanted to become instruments of defense. One wanted to point. One wanted to close. One wanted to reach for the phone in his pocket and begin shaping the story before anyone else could. Now they rest on the glass table, not relaxed, not serene, but governed. The watch keeps ticking beneath his cuff. It no longer sounds like a countdown. It sounds like proof that the moment is still moving. The result is clear before the chairwoman says it. He has lost. The hostile takeover has crossed from threat into fact. A company he built through late flights, brutal quarters, bad coffee, private compromises, and years of controlled obsession is no longer his to command. Something inside him still drops. Discipline does not prevent that. He feels the old fear come back in a lower voice. What are you without this? It does not scream now. It does not need to. It knows the hallways outside this room. It knows the assistant who will not know whether to call him by the same title. It knows the framed photographs in his office, the signed deal tombstones, the private bathroom, the view of the city he used to look down on when he needed to remember he had escaped where he came from. The fear knows exactly where to press. For 1 second, his eyes move toward the far glass wall. The skyline is bright with Monday morning. Cars crawl between buildings. Somewhere down there, a man is probably late to work, angry at a red light, unaware that high above him another man is learning how little altitude protects the ego. The CEO almost laughs, but not because it is funny. Because the room is so polished, and the wound is so ordinary. Men lose titles every day. They lose marriages, jobs, cases, elections, savings, status, rooms they thought would always open for them. What makes the loss dangerous is not only what disappears. It is the desperate need to prove that nothing disappeared. That desperation is still available to him. He can still ruin the exit. He can stand too quickly. He can let the chair scrape hard against the floor. He can make one last comment that follows everyone home. He can give the kind of smile that tells the room he is already planning damage. He can make them pay attention to his pain by making it expensive. The old self offers him that door. The watch ticks once. He does not take it. Instead, he adjusts his cuff. Small. Almost boring. But the movement changes the next 10 seconds. He straightens the fabric over the watch, not to hide it, but to settle himself around it. The anchor that once measured his ownership now measures his restraint. He looks at the chairwoman. I understand the result, he says. The sentence is plain. It tastes like metal. But it is clean. He does not say he accepts the judgment. He does not say he agrees with the process. He does not decorate the wound so the room can feel civilized. He simply acknowledges reality without handing it his spine. The chairwoman nods once, maybe with relief, maybe with respect, maybe with the practiced expression of someone who has survived enough boardrooms to know that dignity is easier to praise after someone else pays for it. There is still business to complete. Transition language. Legal next steps. Communications planning. Temporary authority. The vocabulary of corporate removal is strangely gentle, as if enough procedure can make an ending less human. He listens. Not perfectly. His mind slips once toward the office. Who will touch his desk? Who will box the photographs? Will they leave the watch catalog on the shelf, the one from the year he bought this thing as a private trophy? Will his daughter see the headline before he calls? That last thought strikes harder than he expects. He reaches under the table, not for his phone, but to feel it in his pocket and leave it there. That is the new response. Before, the phone would have been a weapon. A press contact. A loyal executive. A lawyer. A message fired into the world to keep control from bleeding out. Now it becomes a promise delayed for the right reason. He will call his daughter after this. Not as a CEO managing optics. As a father who has just been beaten in public and still has to speak like a man who knows what matters. The meeting continues. A board member asks whether he is willing to support an orderly transition. The wording is careful. The question carries a hook. If he refuses, they can frame him as unstable. If he agrees too easily, he feels like he is helping them erase him. He lets one breath pass. The watch ticks. I will not create instability for the employees, he says. I will have counsel review the process. Both can be true. For the first time that morning, the room has no immediate answer. Not because he has won. Because he has stopped giving them the version of him they were prepared to defeat. That is the shift. The hostile takeover remains hostile. The loss remains loss. The ego is not gone, it is sitting beside him, offended and breathing hard. But it is no longer holding the pen. It no longer writes every sentence, chooses every expression, interprets every glance as a battlefield. He is still angry. He is still afraid. He still wants, in some private and unflattering place, to be begged back into power. But the next action belongs to something steadier. He gathers the documents in front of him. Not hurried. Not slow enough to perform calm. Just at the speed of a man refusing to be dragged by the room's temperature. He slides the agenda into the folder, caps his pen, and stands when the meeting is formally adjourned. The chair does not scrape. That sound matters. In the opening of this morning, the watch ticked like a thread under his cuff, each second counting down toward humiliation. Now, as he stands at the end of the table, the same ticking follows him like a discipline he can carry out of the room. The board members watch him, unsure which version of the man will walk past them. He gives them no spectacle. At the door, he pauses. Not for drama. For memory. He looks back once at the long glass table, the bottled water, the leather folders, the faces that have just voted him out. He does not bless the room. He does not curse it. He lets it be what it is, the place where he lost authority over a company and recovered authority over himself. Then he steps into the hallway. The carpet changes under his shoes. The air feels less sealed. Somewhere near the elevators, a receptionist looks up too quickly, already sensing that news has moved faster than the man himself. His wristwatch ticks in the open now. He touches it once with 2 fingers. Not as a trophy. Not as proof that he is untouchable. As a reminder that peace under fire is not the absence of loss. It is the refusal to let loss choose your face, your voice, or your next honorable step. Most people will never face a boardroom vote on a Monday morning. But they will face the same fire in smaller rooms. A supervisor questions your worth. A partner stops seeing your sacrifice. A family member speaks to the version of you thought you had outgrown. And suddenly, your ego reaches for the microphone. That is your watch ticking. 1 breath before the reply. 1 second before the email. 1 quiet chance to ask whether the next sentence comes from command or injury. The CEO lost the chair, but he did not let the chair take his face with it. That is the practice. Not winning every room. Not being untouched. Walking out with enough inner order to call your daughter, face the hallway, and take the next honorable step. Stay close to this work if you are building that kind of command. Fear can speak, but it does not get to command.